From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to the special edition of Newsmakers, a Democratic primary debate among the candidates for Secretary of State. Hello, I'm Tim White. The Secretary of State's office has several responsibilities, from policing lobbyists to managing the state's elections. During this debate, we aim to show you the differences between the two Democrats looking for your vote. And they are, from left to right on your screen, Guillaume de Ramel and Nellie Gorbea. I will be moderating this debate and asking questions along with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi. We will begin with 1-minute opening statements from each of our candidates. The order was determined by a drawing. Up first, Guillaume de Ramel. Mr. de Ramel has worked in real estate development. He served on the Coastal Resources Management Council from 2011 to 2013. Mr. de Ramel previously ran for Secretary of State in 2006. He's a graduate of Hobart and William Smith University and Columbia University. Mr. de Ramel, your opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Ted, for hosting this forum. And thank you, viewers, especially thank you to you for tuning in. I love this state. I live here with my wife and Molly and our 2 children, Charlie and Elizabeth. I've seen too many missed opportunities, which is why I'm running for Secretary of State. I know how challenging it is to run a business here, much less keep it profitable. You know, businesses shouldn't have to hire an army of lawyers or a team of lobbyists to be able to navigate successfully our state government. Day one, my administration will play a pivotal role in making sure the Rhode Islanders get back to work.
All right, Mr. de Ramel, thank you very much. Now, Nellie Gorbea. Most recently, Ms. Gorbea was the Executive Director of Housing Works Rhode Island. Prior to that, she served as Deputy Secretary of State from 2002 to 2006. Ms. Gorbea is a graduate of Princeton University and Columbia University. Ms. Gorbea, your opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Ted. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you, and thank you, all of you who are listening today, for your interest. I am running for Secretary of State because I want to make government work for all Rhode Islanders. And I come to this with 20 years of experience in the private and the public sector. I was Deputy Secretary of State from 2002 to 2006. I come ready to lead that office on day one. As your Secretary of State, I will make sure that elections are fair, fast, and accurate. I will make it easy for businesses to start and thrive. And I will make sure the government is open and accountable and transparent. I will shine a light on what government does and who is trying to influence government. As a working mom, I have a track record of successful results in that office and in Rhode Island, and I look forward to earning your vote on September 9th.
Thank you, Ms. Gorbea. Now to the topics at hand. As you both know, there is no strict format to today's debate. We are looking for an open and honest discussion of the issues, and we do allow for some back and forth. In fact, we encourage it as long as it's on topic. So let's begin. We're going to start with 38 Studios. The Secretary of State's office is normally a sleepy corner of the State House, but it's been under the spotlight lately. Secretary of State Ralph Mollis launched a 38 Studios lobbying investigation in the wake of a report that we aired in May. His political opponent has criticized him on 2 fronts. One, for being late on the probe, and second, for not handing it off to an independent investigator. We'll start with you, Ms. Gorbea. Should the investigation into possible lobbying violations by key players in the 38 Studios deal continue as is, or should it be handed off?
I think that it's really important to restore people's trust in government, and I would favor, actually, at this point of the game, handing it over to an independent investigator. You know, when I was at the Secretary of State office, we actually did a lot to open up that office and to make sure that it was transparent. We put lobbyist reports, which were in a file cabinet in the basement of the State House, online. So you could actually follow who was registering, how much they're being paid, and what they were lobbying for on. And it's something that you just have to be on top of. And so I have that experience in that office of actually making that office hold people accountable and transparent. I think that the office can handle these things as long as they're taken on a daily basis and handled on the spot.
Before we get to Mr. de Ramel, you think it should be handed off to an independent investigator. Does that mean you do not trust Secretary of State Ralph Malus in this probe?
I just think that at this point, what's really important is to show that government is transparent and accountable. And I have a track record for being personally and professionally transparent. And that's what I think we need to do in that office. So, for example, I was able to do that professionally in the office of making sure that rules and regs were online, that open meetings were online, people can follow their government. And then I have a record of personal transparency, where I've released my taxes. You can see what my income is, what my charitable contributions have been, where I've been, and where my family.
But why does that mean Mr. Malus should hand over the investigation?
I just think that from the point of view of what's really important here is to safeguard, yes, the rights of the people involved, and also the trust of the people of Rhode Island in that office, and that's why. Thank
you. Mr. de Ramel, she thinks it should be handed off to an independent investigator. Do you agree with that, or should he continue with his investigation?
You know, I'm proud of we're the first to really announce the boldest and the biggest plan to reform our lobbying system here in Rhode Island. One of the things we identified in that package was we need to have in place a staff member at the very minimum who's capable of investigating these types of situations, so that things like 38 Studios never happens again. So certainly, but we have the U.S. Attorney at our disposal. I wouldn't be adverse to certainly having him or her take a look at any kind of situation like this. My administration will be about open, transparent.
U.S. Attorney or Attorney General's office?
No, the U.S. Attorney at federal. Because I think right now, this has gotten to such a large scale. U.S. Attorney obviously being completely independent from this whole situation. I think the U.S. Attorney is probably the.
Back to the original question, though, should Mr. Malus continue, or should it be handed off to an independent investigator?
You know what? Some of the things that we discovered. Expanding on our policy work was that office really needs to do a lot of work on not only adding a staff member to be able to investigate these type of situations, but also clarifying the rules and regulations that haven't been touched in over a decade.
I understand what you would do, Mr. de Ramel, but what do you think should happen in this case?
Look, there's an ongoing investigation right now. I haven't looked at it very, very closely on exactly what he's doing, but I certainly wouldn't be adverse to looking at the U.S. Attorney and asking for his help in this matter.
But if I may, I think a really big important problem here is what will you actually do? And so in my opponent's case, for example, he had a case already in front of him where a supporter of his did not issue the right lobbying report at the time being regarding a loan to the majority leader, then Majority Leader Gordon Fox. I pointed this out the minute it came out in the press that there should be an investigation. I followed up on it. I called on my opponent to actually step forward and also call for an investigation, and he was silent. And so in the end, it's not just about policy proposals, it's what you're going to do if you're in office and about the people who are around you. And provide people with a track record of results, of not just policy ideas, but also what are you going to do in the line of fire.
Okay, we actually have a question about that very topic. Ted?
Yeah, we'll go right to it. Mr. de Ramel, as you heard, I was going to say your opponent has been critical, but she was just critical of Ray Rickman, a lobbyist and former state representative. It's just been revealed, gave a personal loan to former House Speaker Gordon Fox in 2009. He is a supporter of yours. Do you think it's appropriate for registered lobbyists to be giving secret loans to top state lawmakers?
Absolutely not.
And have you said anything to Mr. Rickman? Have you done anything? Are you renouncing his support?
No. Look, I'm not going to single out any individual supporter. Certainly, it is appropriate that the Secretary of State's office is investigating this. If there's any wrongdoing, he should be held accountable. My office is not going to change or waver on that in any way. I'm proud to say that we're the first, a year and a half ago, to come out with a policy that said I wouldn't seek or accept any contributions from lobbyists. And I'm proud to see my opponent follow my lead on that. But look, I'm not going to single out any individual supporter. I have many supporters throughout this state, and I'm proud of the support that we have, really, from working men and women, from a bunch of people. Business leaders, community activists, officials. So.
But if there was wrongdoing, there was wrongdoing. There was a loan and an amended report. Clearly, this called for an amendment, right? So there was a problem where this loan was not. The law is very, very clear that anything over $250 that's of a loan or a gift nature has to be reported. So I don't see where there's some sort of gray area. And I think that we have to be able to, in these positions, call people accountable. And that's, I think, where we differ.
But Ray Rickman is not Guillaume de Ramel in the end. It was not, nobody knew about this loan. How could your opponent have known to say something?
Once it came open, he really should have joined me and said, absolutely, even if it's somebody who supports me, you have to go on the record and say, this has to be cleaned up, this has to be investigated. And that's the kind of leadership that this state needs if we're going to move out of the economic doldrums that we're in right now and restore people's trust in government. The Secretary of State is all about transparency and open government. And you have to be able to model that both in your personal life and in your professional life. And I've done both.
You hear that critique, Mr. de Ramel, that you won't call him out in this way, and it shows how you will operate in that office.
Look, I'm running because I love this state, and I do see some tough economic challenges here. But again, questions should be asked. There's a current investigation with the Secretary of State's office. If there's any wrongdoing that's found, discovered by the Secretary of State, absolutely, he should be held accountable.
But it has, just to be clear from what Ms. Gorbea said, do you not think there has been wrongdoing yet, even though the loan was not reported and he's amended his report?
Like I said, I'm going to stick to what I said. I don't need to single out any individual supporter here, and frankly, if there was any wrongdoing, I'm going to let the investigation play its path, and I think that's fair for all parties. I mean, that is one of our constitutional rights, is to let the due process go through. So I'll let it stand there.
And again, this is a difference between us. When we came into office in 2002, I was in charge of managing the day-to-day operations of that office. One of the things that we did was to discover that there were no rules and regs at all for lobbyists to follow. And so everybody was kind of doing whatever they wanted. We came in, we designed rules and regs that, you're right, haven't been touched since then, and then made sure that lobbyists were registering online. And in the end, there were a handful, I want to say something like 14 or 16 lobbyists that still didn't register online. And we went after them, and I made sure that those names were put on a website so that they would know, the public would know that they were not complying. It's that kind of leadership that we need to show in government. It's not about, we'll wait and see. It's about taking action and making sure that people can trust the government is on their side.
All right, let's talk about a topic you both are passionate about now. We're going to start with you, Ms. Gorbea, and that is voter ID. Voters are now required to present an ID when they go in to vote. Neither of you like it, but it was passed with the support from Democrats and by some minority lawmakers. So why are they wrong?
I just don't think that there was the kind of support and evidence that you needed to put a barrier of that kind. Now it is the law, and I will make sure that it is met. However, I want to look at the impact of that law. It's very, this country sadly has a history of disenfranchising people at the ballot box, and that's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the fact that the percentage of provisional ballots that are being disqualified is higher now than it used to be. I want to see who's being disqualified, and are there any geographic patterns?
So in your answer, you said that there wasn't enough strong evidence to support doing something like that. So that means we should wait for there to be a problem in order to
for something where you're actually going to have an impact on possibly disenfranchising people, yes. I do think that you do need the evidence to see that there's a real problem here. And, and I think about women, for example, elderly women who tend not to have ID later on in their lives. And now they've got to go out and get an ID and, with the Secretary of State's office. I'm very troubled by the impact of this law, and that's what I'm going to research once I'm Secretary of State.
Okay, Mr. de Ramel, why are they wrong?
Look, there's no contrast here with my opponent and I on this issue. It's a fundamental right to vote, and frankly, I think there's no evidence, empirical evidence that we have actually fraud here. There are other ways. I certainly believe in protecting the integrity of our elections. There's other ways to do that, such as expanding our central voter registry to intrastate to connect Connecticut, Massachusetts into it. But look, it's been used throughout the country in a lot of red states to disenfranchise key groups of minorities, women. Women are statistically have a greater chance of being disenfranchised because they have a different name. Look, in 2006, my name was on the ballot, and unfortunately, they couldn't find my name on the voter roll. I had to cast a provisional ballot. My vote did not count in 2006. How many times is that going to happen?
Let me bring up a point that your opponent did. It is the law in your capacity. If you become Secretary of State, you cannot repeal it. So how are you going to handle managing something you dislike?
You mean repeal to actually?
You can't repeal it, so you're going to actually have to implement voter ID. So what are you going to do differently, if at all, from the current Secretary of State on voter ID?
Really, I think a lot of it obviously has to do with education, both civically for voters, but also poll workers, working with the Board of Elections, who really has the ultimate say with the poll worker training, and legislators, and having them understand, I mean, really some of the details that are involved in this legislation, and making sure that really if they understand the consequences of what's happening here.
I want to give 30 seconds each on this before we go to Ted on the next topic. We got this on Twitter, and we actually get this a lot on this topic, which is how do you square your desire to repeal voter ID when Rhode Island requires multiple IDs when applying for a job? Or even if you go to a department store, you present your credit card, they often ask for an ID. Why should voting be less secure? 30 seconds.
It's not that it's less secure. It's that you can have, you can violate people's voting rights by asking for that voter ID if that person doesn't have it. And when you apply for a job, you know, you're usually not, 89 years old or 90 years old, and those are not constitutional rights. This is a right that people have fought and died for. And so I want to make sure that everybody who's eligible to vote can and does vote. I have a track record of that, and this is again another distinction between me and my opponent. I've actually done community teach-ins on how voting works and how do you participate in our democracy. I've done that for over 20 years. And so that's what I'm bringing here to the table, is that actual community experience of trying to get people to participate.
All right, Mr. De Ramel, it's a constitutional right, so why shouldn't it be protected with an ID to ensure that it's safe?
Say again, I'm not following.
In other words, to the original question that we received, why should presenting an ID or voting be any less secure than buying something in a department store?
Again, it's not about making it less secure or more secure. Frankly, I think, like I said earlier, there are other ways to make sure that the integrity of our elections are well protected. Frankly, we need to look at modernizing our elections. I've talked, I think, one big contrast. We don't need to study early voting, in-person voting. We really need to, we can do it. We've seen it work so well in so many other states that Republican governors actually started scaling it back. So things like that are really, if you want to see voter fraud, I mean, look at mail-in ballots right now. There is no voter ID required for that. So I really want to focus on how can we move Rhode Island forward, and certainly issues like the voter ID is important, but folks are worried about how to get work, how to get back to work, and how to move this economy forward.
That's actually a good segue into our next question. I'll stick with you, Mr. De Ramel. You've discussed the economy a lot in your campaign. You said at one point, quote, as Secretary of State, you could positively impact our economic climate by cutting red tape, increasing openness and transparency, and creating a new way of doing business here in Rhode Island. It sounds good, but how can a Secretary of State actually have that kind of impact on the economy?
I'll tell you, my experience building a project down on Aquidneck Island with all the red tape, it took me 13 years to get through that. Really, that's unnecessary. As a businessman who's been in the private sector for 20 years, I've worked throughout the country and I understand. I mean, I've seen it work and not work, but I think Rhode Island unfortunately has too many challenges. And really, the Secretary of State's office certainly can, first off, start with a basic roadmap of our state government. I mean, folks shouldn't have to hire an army of lawyers or team of lobbyists to be successful navigating our state government. And the Secretary of State's office really can play a tremendous role in helping businesses, voters, folks really get engaged.
Ms. Gorbea, you said in your opening remarks today you want to make it easier for businesses to start and thrive in Rhode Island. Again, specifically, how could you do that from the Secretary of State's office?
Definitely, and I actually know very well, having worked there already. One of the things that we can absolutely do is, when I was last there, we took what was a paper process for filing your business incorporation papers and really developed an online master application, ran into some really bad roadblocks with other departments. I now want to come in first day, sit down with that governor and say, we absolutely need to make it easier for businesses in the state. I want to make sure that all of your department heads understand the need to synchronize our system so that people can just go into the Secretary of State's website, do a master application, and have that feed everything else. There shouldn't be a need for people to have to go from office to office to office to fill out forms. even if you're doing an online roadmap for them. It has to be easy to get and easy to use, the information that we provide out of that office. And if I might add,
briefly, please.
Yes. I would like to see some actual experience and results from the business experience that my opponent is speaking of. I would like to see sort of a track record in that business that he's talked about quite extensively, but never given us actually the deal. I haven't seen no evidence yet of either his success or his failure with regards to business here in Rhode Island.
Well, why don't we do that in 30 seconds? What were your successes and failures? What, in a nutshell, your resume in 30 seconds on that?
Okay. Well, I'll start with the project that I just mentioned on state property. Yeah, that's a wonderful project that really brought a number of people here to Rhode Island that otherwise would have never come here but for this project, who are now spending money, buying houses, employing people, contractors, putting their kids in the school system here, buying groceries, etc. So that's just project number one. I've also helped grow a small construction company, and really there I learned some of the incredible challenges that not just a construction company faces, but a small company here in Rhode Island faces. And frankly, that's really unique experience that I think is unmatched in this race to bring to our state government. That's why I'm running for Secretary of State, to really help folks be able to navigate our state government.
So we want to cover some topics with our rapid fire section here, so we can get through them very quickly. So we are looking for one-word answers, and some of these you sort of answered already, but I just want to get them on the record, and we'll start with Mr. De Ramel. Do you support online voter registration?
Absolutely.
Ms. Gorbea?
Definitely.
And Ms. Gorbea?
And I know how to do it.
Do you support same-day registration?
Yes.
You do. Mr. De Ramel?
Yes.
Mr. De Ramel, letter grade for Secretary of State Ralph Mollis?
Look, I'm a terrible grader. He's done a fine job.
You don't want to put a letter grade to that?
He's done a fine job.
All right. Ms. Gorbea?
B-.
Okay. And via Twitter from John Robitaille, who is the former GOP candidate for governor. He wants to know, yes or no, would you support moving the primary elections to April or May? Ms.
Yes,
Gorbea, you
absolutely.
would? And Mr. De Ramel?
I certainly would like to engage the General Assembly. We have to look at this carefully, but sure, absolutely. Anything that can improve elections.
All right. Ted?
All right. You could hear it there in the rapid fire. It's hard to see a lot of policy differences between the two of you, but we're going to try. Ms. Gorbea, is there any specific policy difference you would highlight between you and Mr. De Ramel?
Absolutely, because policy is not just about words. It's about what you do with those words. And so I actually have a track record of being transparent and of holding government accountable, dating back to a suit that I filed against the General Assembly in 2001 over redistricting at that time and how it might have violated voting rights. So what you get in me, which is very different than my opponent, is a person with results in the public sector of actually moving things through government here and restoring people's trust in government.
But the same policy is just, you would argue, a better execution?
But I would argue, yes, a better execution and actually execution, period. I don't think we have the evidence here provided here by my opponent as to what his results have been in any of these topics that the Secretary of State handles.
Well, I'll both let you respond to that, but also ask, do you have any policy differences you see with your opponent?
Yeah, let me bring up the early voting, in-person voting. I think my opponents mentioned that we need to study this further. I disagree. I think we've seen this throughout the country. A number of Republican governors actually see it work too well that they want to scale it back. Our mission really should be to try to increase civic participation, increase the people getting out there and voting. So anything that we can do to really improve that is certainly one thing.
On the experience question, though, it is true that Ms. Gorbea worked in the Secretary of State's office. Does she have a point that she knows how to go in and do these things that you agree on?
Look, I've never roamed the halls of the State House as a staffer. I may not know where the bathrooms are, but at the end of the day, I'll take my 2 decades of experience really working in the private sector throughout the country, starting a business, helping a small construction company grow, really to help other people, Rhode Islanders, get back to work.
Early voting popular elsewhere?
Yes, it is popular. This is a misstatement of my position. I am in favor of a goal of early voting. As all policy measures, you have to look at the cost and the impact. I'm not someone who's going to go in there and say, throw costs to the wind, not worry about it, because I know how hard it is to get things done in government and how much people are already paying in taxes. So I want to make sure that we have cost-effective government and that the goals that we set are realistic and positive. But yes, I do believe in early voting. Having said that, I know much more than just where offices or certain areas of the State House are. I've actually got a track record that you can look at and see results both in the private sector and the public sector. And that's what differentiates us.
With time running thin, I want to ask you this question. A report out this week found states that strengthened their open records and open meetings laws showed a decline in public corruption cases. Within the past several years, Rhode Island made some changes to the state's Access to Public Records Act, but some say it didn't go far enough. Mr. De Ramel, are you satisfied with our current public records laws?
Absolutely not. Actually,
what would you change?
Well, if you look at the Sunshine Foundation came out with a report specifically talking about executive orders and actually making those more public and accessible. But the biggest power of the Secretary of State's office is really to help make our government, our state government, city and town governments more open, transparent, and accessible. If you do that, you have accountable government. And really, so that's my top priority.
Okay, Ms. Gorbea.
Yeah, I absolutely know that government transparency is absolutely the crucial, most important responsibility, along with voting and elections, of the Secretary of State's office. And I have a track record for actually putting things online, like lobbyists' reports, so that you can see what people are earning and
Specific
for what
to
they're
our
doing.
Access to Public Records
Yeah,
Act.
no, I absolutely do think that we can improve the Access to Public Records Act, and I would be an absolute watchdog for that. But I do think that we have to not just talk transparency, we have to show transparency. And I have done that both in my personal and professional life.
You know, with one aspect of the public records law that lawmakers did not allow to go through, and that was making emails to and from elected officials, except where their constituents be a public record, just like any other memo. We have about 30 seconds left here. Ms. Gorbea, do you think those emails should be public?
You know, I think that at this point of space and time, emails really are public property because they're part of the governmental system. So I don't see any problems with actually making emails public.
Okay, Mr. De Ramel?
I don't have a problem with that either, especially if you're using government resources, computers, iPhones, absolutely.
Okay, and finally, within 20 seconds, Ms. Gorbea, are you backing anyone for governor in this race?
I am not.
At this point, and Mr. De Ramel?
Look, I know how extensive and time-consuming running my own race is. I'm glad to see that there's so many qualified gubernatorial candidates. I will support the Democrat in November.
Okay, thank you very much to both of the candidates for taking part in this debate, and we have much more to come. Starting next month, we are once again bringing you more live gubernatorial debates. Democrats Clay Pell, Angel Taveras, and Gina Raimondo on the issues. Live 7 p.m. on August 29th. Then Republicans Alan Fung and Ken Block on September 2nd. Both debates are a full hour and commercial free. Of course, you can watch all of our debates and catch up on each race in campaign 2014 on our website, WPRI.com. Once again, we thank you for watching this special edition of Newsmakers, a debate with the Democratic candidates for Secretary of State. Stick with Eyewitness News, your source for campaign 2014 coverage. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.